In round one of the Axis and Allies Global Tournament Final, the Soviets devastated the Germans on the Western Front. Japan shocked the Allies by purchasing 6 transports, and the Americans captured Brazil and dropped a huge fleet in the Atlantic. Where do they go from here? Time to head back to Gen Con for round 2 of the 2024 Axis and Allies Global Tournament Final. Let's make it hot. Welcome to Board Game Nation. My name is Gary Blevins. Thank you so much for watching. And a very special thank you to our friends at Historical Board Gaming for sponsoring our coverage of this event. Follow the link in the description to learn more about all they have to offer, including a full line of Axis and Allies compatible accessories and so much more. Renegade Game Studios provided the giant premium playmat that we'll be using for this series, and any other accessories that you notice during this series were provided by our friends at Historical Board Gaming. Time to choose your own adventure. First, if you're brand new to Axis and Allies, thank you for clicking on this video, but you are definitely in the deep end of the pool. For something easier for newcomers to digest, I suggest following this link here to check out our coverage of the 2023 World Championship featuring the 1942 Second Edition. If you missed part 1 of this series, or you need a refresher on the global out-of-the-box rules, or need to know more about the global 42 setup and tournament rules, you can follow this link here or in the pinned comment below to head back to part 1. For a quick previously on, you can jump to this timestamp here. To move right to the start of round 2, you can head over to this timestamp. Either way, from here on, we're going to assume that you are more or less up to speed on the rules for this event, though we are going to be asking Robin to clear up a few issues for us along the way. Okay, end of preamble. It's time to get back into the game. All right, friends, it's time to jump back into the action of the 2024 Gen Con Global Final for Axis and Allies. We've got Robin Bielefeldt joining us. Please welcome him back to the show.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be back.
Well, Robin, thanks again for taking the time. A couple of things that we wanted to clear up about the rules that I forgot to mention in our briefing from part 1. The first, and I think it's going to be important in this particular conversation today, is how do the straits work in this game? We've got the Dardanelles, and then there's also the strait between Denmark and Finland. Can you talk to us about how the rules for those are set up?
Right. So there's 3 straits and 2 canals in this game. Now, canals work the same way as they have in other Axis and Allies games. So you would have to control Panama in order to move ships through the Panama Canal. Your side would have to control that territory. In the same way, in Egypt, there's the Suez Canal. You have to control both Egypt and Transjordan in order to move ships through there. The same applies for straits. If we take a look at the Dardanelles, you have to control the territory of Turkey in order to move ships back and forth out of the Black Sea. The airplanes can fly between those 2 territories without any issue, but you have to have performed a strict neutral attack and taken Turkey in order to physically move ships between those 2 sea zones.
Let me jump in here. It's important to remember, though, that if you attack Turkey, you're attacking a strict neutral. And we did talk about the strict neutrals, meaning that if you attack Turkey, then all of the other strict neutral territories become pro the other side.
Yes, so there's 3 major strict neutrals on the board that you can see. One is Sweden, one is Spain, and the other one is Turkey. Usually in these tournament games, since the Axis really don't have anything to lose, they end up attacking those territories on the very last turn in order to get the IPCs, because that counts towards their IPC total on the board for the Axis. So that would be the drawback to attacking Turkey early on. But later in the game, there's really no constraints to that because the game's about to end anyways. So that's why we see usually the Axis turn around and attack Turkey at the very end of the game, and Sweden and Spain as well. So it's important for the Axis to at least have the option later on in the game in order to do that.
Okay, I'm sorry, I interrupted. So that's how the Dardanelles work. What about the other straits?
So there's 2 more straits to talk about. The first is the Danish Straits. You have to control the territory of Denmark in order to move back and forth out of the Baltic into the North Sea. Other territories around there don't affect that, only the territory of Denmark. And of course, planes can fly, just like at the Dardanelles, planes can fly back and forth at will without any issue. The third strait that we need to discuss is the Strait of Gibraltar. You have to own the territory of Gibraltar in order to move ships into and out of the Mediterranean, except for submarines. Submarines can pass through that strait, even if your side does not control the territory of Gibraltar.
So what that means then is that German destroyer that's sitting in 95 could not go out and attack that French cruiser in 91 because they do not control Gibraltar, right?
That's correct. So the Germans would have to take it, and then the Italians would be able to move through that territory after the British get a chance to counter that.
All right, cool. So I appreciate you taking us through those because I think the rules for those are going to influence some of the strategic choices that we see here in round 2. One last point of clarification, though, the Germans built an industrial complex in Greece, so they can now build in the Black Sea. But if they build in the Black Sea, those units wouldn't be able to move out, which is kind of a weird little picadillo of the rules. Am I getting that right?
So the Germans would have to attack the territory of Turkey, activating the strict neutral rule. They would have to own that territory for Italian ships to be able to move in and reinforce. But in order to get any ships out of the Black Sea, they would have to have attacked it and owned it for an entire turn, or the Italians would have to attack it.
But the converse is true. If the Soviets were to use their industrial complex in Ukraine to build in the Black Sea, they also wouldn't be able to get out unless an Allied power owned Turkey.
That's correct.
That's all really interesting, and I think important for people to keep in mind as they're getting used to global, and particularly the Global 42 setup for the game. We noticed in part 1 that we used a term that we didn't properly define, and I apologize for that. That's entirely my fault. But Robin referred to something called the Norway knockout a number of times, and it is the strategy that's being used by the Allies in this particular game, or at least that's how they've started out. But we didn't really define what that meant. So, Robin, I wonder if you can take us through kind of what that means and how it works.
Sure. There's 4 steps to the Norway knockout. You've seen the first one on US 1. I built aircraft carrier 3 transports in Seazone 101 in the Atlantic. That's going to give us 5 transports to land 10 troops somewhere in Europe. Step 2 of the Norway knockout is that the U.S. moves to Seazone 91, which is off of Gibraltar. They have a friendly naval base there, so they can range pretty far from that space. And on US 2, they build 6 bombers in the eastern U.S., which gives them 8 bombers and 10 troops to land somewhere in Europe. If the UK moves in and takes Norway on their second turn on UK 2, that makes it a friendly space. So the US then non-combats 10 troops, 8 bombers, and however many fighters they have in the Atlantic to the sea zone off of Norway, and they land there. If you notice, the eastern U.S. is exactly 7 spaces, if you count them, away from Norway. So bombers from the eastern U.S. can range all the way out there. Having 8 U.S. bombers and 10 troops to protect them in that territory not only deprives the Germans of a $5 bonus for owning Norway and Denmark, with Sweden staying strict neutral. In addition to that, 8 bombers can range every German facility in Europe. So Karl, who's playing as the Germans, is not going to be able to get a nickel for his grandma because there's going to be so much damage on all of his factories. The door is going to be wide open for the Russians to just move into Eastern Europe. In addition to that, you have to remember the Straits rule. So if the UK moves in and takes Denmark, then the Italians would have an opportunity to respond to that. If they cannot retake Denmark from the UK, the US moves through into the Baltic and seizes Berlin.
And that would just be a mess. That would just be the end of the game, it seems like. I don't know how you would recover from something like that.
It would be the end of the game in Europe, but you have to remember that the victory conditions are split. So Japan would still have the opportunity to win the game with 6 out of the 8 cities in the Pacific. So we've coined that strategy, the Norway knockout.
Okay, so cool. So that's a good explanation of kind of what the objective was for the Allies. Now we'll have to see whether or not it actually worked out that way, because like the man said, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So we'll see what happens here. Before we jump in, let's take a quick look back at round one and kind of where we left that game. Some of the big question marks that we had at the end of round one. I think the big question mark really was what was going to happen with these Japanese transports. Japan bought 6 transports on round one, which just seemed like an incredible number of transports for them. And they have the units to fill them as well. So I think that's going to be something that we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on. In the North Atlantic, the Germans have a fleet that is sitting off the coast of Norway that has a transport in it, and it can reach a couple of really interesting places. It could land in Scotland. It could swing around because it has access to the naval base in Western Germany. It has 3 moves from there. So it could get up and around and land in Archangel or any part of the northern edge there. Of course, they are probably interested in picking off that Russian sub there because that's going to continue to be able to roll convoy damage if it continues to stay there. So there's a couple of really interesting options. The other thought is to clear the destroyer, or try to clear the destroyer in 110 and move through to try to get down to the open Atlantic. So I think they've got a lot of really interesting options down there. Robin, what were you thinking coming out of round one?
If we take a look at the situation on the board at this point in the game, you count up the number of IPCs that the Axis control on the board, and it's at about 108 right now. The seizure of Sumatra by the UK was a big boost, not only to their income, but in taking money away from what the Axis actually have on the board. And that's what matters in the tournament rules. So what we're going to see as the game progresses is that number that's at 108 right now is going to go up and down. If the Axis ever get to 125 IPCs on the board, you have to understand this game flips dramatically, and it's no longer the Allies' game to lose. The Allies have to take territories now to get the Axis back under 125 IPCs, and that's how the rest of the game is going to play out.
So with that, I guess we'll jump right back in here. Let's head over to the Russians' first turn. They're still pretty spread out in the northeast portion of their territories, but they have started to step into China. And they had a big role. That was kind of the big highlight of the first round, was how successful the Russians were in their opening assault. They rolled through Belarus and the Baltic states, Ukraine, and took very, very few losses in round one. So they're in a really strong position going into round two. Whether they got 9 infantry there in Belarus, they've got 6 tanks between Belarus and Smolensk, plus a full complement of air units at their air base in Leningrad. Ukraine is looking really strong. So I think they're probably the strongest power at this point from their original starting position. So they decide to kick us off with 1 infantry, a mechanized infantry, 5 artillery, and 2 tanks for their purchase this time. For their combat, they are going to move into the Baltic states with a couple of infantry, a fighter, and a tactical bomber. In the eastern Poland, they're moving in with 3 infantry and a fighter against 1 guy. And then they're also making a light push into Bessarabia, 2 infantry and a fighter. The sub in 125 is staying put. And they are going to step from northwest Persia into Iraq, which is going to give them control of the territory. And if you'll remember from our first round, the UK attacked this, killed all of the units that were there, but failed to take the territory, which, if you've looked at the list of national objectives, is the best possible outcome here, because if the Soviets control Iraq, they get a bonus of 3 IPCs per turn. So for the UK, this would have only been worth 2, but for the Soviets, it's worth 5. So this is going to be a nice boost to their economic production. And let's see how it turned out for them. Of course, they stepped in and took Iraq for free. And they were successful down the line in the Western Front as well. They took out everyone in the Baltic states, East Poland, and Bessarabia, and took no losses this time. They took out 4 German infantry units and took no losses. Again, another big round for the Russians. For their non-combat, on the east side, they consolidated in Saka and just moved the 2 guys over from Buryatia. The 2 guys from Tunguska stepped down into Kansu. The guy from Yenski stepped into Tunguska. And basically, they're all making their way towards Shenxi and the existing Chinese stack that is there. On the western front, it's a big party in Belarus. They have decided to consolidate pretty much everybody that can reach there. I get flack sometimes for spending so much time chipping up all of the pieces in all of the videos and during my live streams, but this is why. Because this is what that looks like if you don't chip it up. And this is what it looks like after it's chipped up. You can actually see what's there. So take time, chip with care, my friends, chip with care. Anyway, so Belarus ends up with 7 infantry, a mechanized infantry, 4 artillery, 2 AA guns, and a whopping 8 tanks in that column. Leningrad has the 2 fighters and the TAC in it, and then the fighter that came down to Bessarabia ended in Ukraine. A couple of guys moved out of Russia into Bryansk. A couple guys stepped forward into Western Ukraine and also took control of that territory. That marker actually shouldn't be there. Once we chip up everybody in China, they've got 2 Russians in Shenxi to go with the 7 Chinese infantry that are there, 2 in Kansu. And when we go to mobilize, we've got a pretty healthy stack of guys coming in here. 2 artillery and an infantry coming into Leningrad. 2 tanks and a mech into Moscow. And the remaining 3 artillery coming down into Ukraine. Any thoughts on Russia's turn here?
I'd just like to point out how absurd the situation in Eastern Europe is at this point. The Soviets, they just collected 47 IPCs for not only their $5 national bonus, but they also own the territory of Iraq and get a bonus for that. So they've already achieved economic parity almost with the Germans. Soviet forces are consolidated in Belarus, and tanks from there can strike into Poland or into Slovakia or even into Romania, where the German forces are still split between 3 different territories. They're still in Berlin, Poland, and in Romania. So in 2 turns, Stephen has flipped the situation in Eastern Europe from German-dominated to a sea of red. They've completely changed the board state. The Western Allies haven't even landed yet. It's just patently absurd how powerful this Russian opening is. They've only lost 5 infantry so far, plus 1 guy on G1. So you're never going to see this usually. They're usually not quite this powerful. We had a very healthy debate over whether this is the turn to start buying mechs for the invasion of Europe. I've never seen anything like that.
This is definitely an unusual board state. The Russians are usually never this strong in any version of the game. This is really pretty atypical, so it'll be interesting to see how the Germans respond to it.
This is what separates Stephen Green from your average Axis and Allies player. This is what makes him a champion contender.
On to Japan for their second turn. They are going to purchase 2 more transports, because they don't have enough already. They got 2 more transports coming in, along with 2 artillery and an air base and another naval base. So it'll be interesting to see where those land. For their combat moves, they are stepping forward into Hupei with the guy from Shikar. Big party in Kweichow. There's no opposition there, so this is they're just taking control of that space. However, they are moving completely out of Yunnan, it looks like. They're coming into Burma with 4 infantry, 2 artillery from Yunnan. The guy from Shan State is stepping over. One of the fighters from Siam is coming over into Burma. It's a bad day to be the 1 UK guy in Burma. There's no doubt about that. That's going to be a tough day for him. 2 fighters and an attack bomber coming down from Siam are going after the cruiser and the transport there in 41. You'll notice that in the Philippines, there is a naval base that's under Japanese control. So the transport in 35 gets 3 moves. It moves over to 34 to pick up the 1 infantry that was on Palau Island, moves back to 35, grabs one of the infantry that are in the Philippines, moves into 44, and drops off both guys in Celebes to take control of that territory. Again, uncontested. They'll be taking that one for free. These moves are not for free, however. There will be some contest happening here. So the destroyer from C-Zone 6 moves over to attack the destroyer in 25. The fighter is coming out of Japan, moves into 6 to 16 and then to 25. So it's got 2 moves left because there's an air base there in Japan. In 26, just about every other air unit that could reach is involved in this battle. And what's interesting to me about it is that like all of these units are coming to destroy 1 cruiser and 1 transport. It does feel like overkill until you remember the scramble rule, which is something that I'm really bad at.
So what's important to remember here is that the airbase can only service 3 planes for scrambling. This is why the ANZAC fighter landed in Hawaii. So I have 3 fighters that I could bring out to help defend that cruiser, but I would not be able to also bring the tactical bombers out because there is limited 3. So this is why you see so many Japanese planes going into that territory. The 2 fighters that I scrambled out on US-1 caused some major damage to the Japanese Air Force. And they're trying to make sure that my 3 fighters stay in Hawaii, otherwise they're going to be destroyed.
Ultimately, the Allied players decide not to scramble here and leave the cruiser and the port cruiser and the transport to their own defense. It's possible. I guess there's 6 air units against the 1 cruiser. Stranger things have happened. But how did it work out for them? In China, of course, they stepped into Hubei and Weichao with no problem, taking control of both of those territories. In Burma, they also came through and I believe took no losses there. They did take a hit when they sank the cruiser and the transport here, and the Japanese opted to take the tactical bomber as the hit. Of course, they stepped into Celebes with no problem. And in 25, they were able to take out the destroyer there, and that destroyer died alone, didn't take anybody with him. In 26, though, it looks like they got 1 hit back with that cruiser, and again, they opted to take a tactical bomber as the hit. Looking at the total losses here, it looks like it's going to be 22 for the Axis and a whopping 49 for the Allies. Pretty heavy. I wonder how you felt about this turn.
Yeah, I mean, our cruisers were hitting, so we were happy to get those 2 tacticals with our 2 cruisers. If you remember, on the Italians' first turn, they lost a bomber attacking a cruiser, so we were pretty happy with the way our cruisers were rolling so far in this game.
Absolutely. I would be too. All right, time for the Japanese non-combat. The guys that are in Manchuria basically split up. They moved 2 and an artillery into Jehol and then 1 over into Korea. The rest of everybody decides to stay put, including the guys in Kwangsi. I thought they might move into Yunnan to kind of fill that void, but they opted to stay in Kwangsi. In the southern end, it looks like the 2 fighters from 41 landed in Siam, and then 2 fighters, one of which came from, I think, C-Zone 46, the other from Burma, came back and landed in French Indochina. And we now have a pretty good idea of what's going to be going on with those transports. 4 of the 6 transports came down from C-Zone 6, fully loaded with 6 infantry and artillery and a tank, and landed in French Indochina. So it looks like they're making a pretty strong push at Calcutta with these transports. And they also have the transports with the 2 guys in 44 that can get to a couple of interesting places from there. The other 2 transports in C-Zone 6 zipped down to 33. I did think that it was interesting that those transports moved empty instead of bringing units with them. I don't know if there were enough units to do that. They could have grabbed at least the 1 guy from Korea and brought him down, but I'm not sure entirely what the game plan here is, but I always hate seeing transports move around empty. The transport that was in 33 grabbed one of the guys from the Caroline Islands, zipped over to the Gilbert Islands, and then came up north and landed on Wake Island to put 3 infantry in that space. One of the air units from 26 came down and landed in 33 on the carrier there. The rest of them land in 31 on the carriers that are there, including that fighter that was in C-Zone 25. So 31 has the 4 carriers on it. The TAC bomber landed on Wake Island, but there is an airfield there, so it can move 5 from there if needed, but they also have a battleship in tow. And then 25 is occupied by a destroyer. I will say if I were playing the UK here, I would definitely be feeling the pressure on Calcutta at this point because they've got 6 infantry and an artillery and the two AA guns, and it looks like there's a lot of land units and air power that can get to Calcutta. So I would imagine that they're certainly feeling the pressure now. But the Japanese go ahead and mobilize. They've got their 2 transports and the 2 artillery. Of course, those are going to go into Japan and into Sea Zone 6. But where did the air base and the naval base go? Oh, okay. They land in French Indochina, giving those fighters the ability to scramble in the defense of Sea Zone 36. And they dropped that naval base in Hainan, which is going to be particularly interesting because now those transports can move 3 spaces instead of just 2, so they can actually reach Calcutta now. If there was pressure before, there's a ton of pressure now. And that's going to be a tough force to manage. One last thing that I wanted to mention here, as I was taking all of these pictures, like I was focused on all of the pressure that was on Calcutta, I also noticed that the naval base in Hainan and servicing Sea Zone 36 gives those transports the ability to not just get to Calcutta, they can also land pretty heavy in Australia. So they've got 3 moves. They can land in Western Australia, they can land in the Northern Territory, and they can be joined by the transport that's in 44 and the transports that are in 33. So they could get to the Northern Territory of Australia with, what is that, 4, 5, 6, 7 transports, all of which would be full. So they could land on J3 with 14 land units in the Northern Territory, which would overwhelm the Australians' ability to respond. So there's quite a bit of pressure between Calcutta and Australia at this point. I wonder, as you were looking at this, what were you worried about?
So I'm seeing that the Japanese are trying to keep their options open in the South Pacific, but since we're not seeing a heavy Japanese push into China and getting ready to hit Russia, we know that they're not going that way. If you remember, part 1, we had discussed the various victory conditions for the Axis. There's 2 possible victory conditions at this point. 125 IPCs on the board when you count up all 3 Axis powers. Or the other option is the Japanese taking 6 out of the 8 cities in the Pacific and holding them for a turn. Here, Charles has telegraphed that that's what he's going for. He's not making a big push into China and Russia and collecting all those IPCs. He's not making a huge push into the Indian Ocean so that he can grab the Middle East. We're not seeing his fleets move that way. So he is 100% going for Calcutta and either Sydney or Hawaii. The fleet off of Wake Island is telling me that he's going for Hawaii. Also, he completely ignored the ANZAC Navy. The ANZAC still have 3 ships available, and they can move to counteract anywhere that the Japanese transports, those lone Japanese transports in the South Pacific, whichever way they go.
Okay, so they'll need to get 2 of those 3 cities, essentially. They'll need to get Calcutta, of the 3, Sydney, Calcutta, and Honolulu. They need to get 2 out of those 3, and they can win.
That's correct.
On to the U.S.'s second turn.
It's pretty obvious to us at this point that the Russians are pretty powerful. They're on the verge of marching into Eastern Europe. We don't know if they have any chance whatsoever at 125 IPC victory. So the only avenue left for them to win is for Japan taking 6 out of 8 cities in the Pacific. So this is where we decided to go ahead and abandon the Norway knockout. I assume that Charles was the bigger threat here, since he's set up to go into Hawaii and possibly grab Calcutta within the next couple of turns. So this is where we changed tack. I made sure I cleared it with Steven and Mike, letting them know that we're not going to be putting any more resources into the Atlantic. So this was all 100% defend the islands against the Japanese at this point.
Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Wow. Okay, so this is a lot. This is 2 carriers, a cruiser, a destroyer, 3 transports, and an additional fighter. This is a ton of material. Again, talking about the incredible economic power of the U.S., this is a monster purchase. I believe the total here is 73 IPCs in one go in the second round, and I don't think the Americans have taken any territories.
pro-neutral territory in Brazil, but they also get are collecting 20 IPCs and bonuses.
So obviously, this is a great demonstration of the kind of ridiculous American economic power, and just being able to purchase what in other versions of this game would take 2 or 3 turns for the Americans to be able to build up to be able to just drop this on one purchase is quite the statement of the impact the Americans can have on one side or the other of this game. Combat, though, in this round is actually pretty light. They're just going to go after the destroyer that's in 25. They're going to send the sub and then all of the American air units off of Honolulu using that airbase to pop out there to try to pick that guy off. And they are successful in that endeavor and take no losses. So it's just the destroyer for the Axis going to the bottom of the deep this time. Non-combat, though, is where it's really interesting for the Americans this time. They decide to bring the battleship out from C-Zone 10. I thought this was very, very interesting.
So, I'm looking at those 2 transports that he bought on J2 with the 2 artillery, the 2 infantry in Korea. I want to make sure that those guys can't get to Hawaii before my fleet can get in the water. So the only ship that I had available was a battleship. So,
well, I will say the upside is this is that for them to go and take it, it's not, they can't just send like one random destroyer. Like they've got to send something that's going to be able to deliver 2 hits, and you're going to get at least 1 roll back at a 4. So it's going to be something that's probably going to take a hit with it. If it's the battleship, it's going to take the damage. It might end up having to go back to C-Zone 6 to repair, so on. So I don't think this is bad. I just think that it surprised me when I saw it and I moved it. I was like, wow, okay, that's going to be big. But
sending a battleship out as a transport blocker is not usually my first call.
Right. It's an unusual choice. But if you got to do it, you got to do it. I totally understand. On the Atlantic side, however, this was, I guess, what would have been the Norway knockout. This unit's moving out here. So the entire fleet moves out of 101 and into 91. The 2 transports that were off the coast of Brazil come up, and all of those land units have landed in Gibraltar. Now, I know it looks like they might be in Spain, but Gibraltar's kind of a small space, so all of those units are landing in Gibraltar, but the fighter is stopped there in C-Zone 91 on the American carrier. So there's a little bit of a fighter shuffle that happened here. The fighter from the eastern United States is actually the one in 91, and the fighter that was on the carrier in 101 is on the UK carrier in 109, along with the destroyer. They've got this massive fleet to place someplace, and it all goes to the Pacific. So they drop the 2 carriers, the cruiser, the destroyer, the 3 transports, and the fighter. The fighter does land in the western United States, though, not on the carrier. But there's an airbase there, so they'll have essentially the same movement that they would have. And that fighter can scramble out if the Japanese decide to get froggy and attack that fleet that's sitting there. But they've got the 3 transports there, and as that happens, they have enough units there to fill all 3 of those transports. So they've got a couple of options along the way. So this is the board state in the Pacific Theater at the end of the Americans' turn. They've got that huge Japanese fleet still sitting off the coast of Wake Island, threatening Hawaii, but there's a battleship and a sub on patrol duty in C-Zone 35 off of Midway, but a fresh pack fleet has just landed in C-Zone 10. The ANZAC Navy still has a chance to move around, and there's lots and lots of air power, including the 2 bombers that came all the way across from the eastern United States to land in Honolulu. So there might be enough air power in 26 now to threaten one of those fleets. If the Japanese fleet just stays where it is, there might be, what is there, 6 American air units there now. They might be able to go at that fleet in 31. On the Atlantic side, they've got a big stack now in Gibraltar, which again has that naval base in it that belongs to the UK, so it will give the movement bonus to the American and the French sea units that are in that space.
We landed heavy in Gibraltar. I was worried about him bringing his transport back and just grabbing the territory so that we did not have access to the naval base and could not move through to threaten Rome. So, and from 91, we are threatening Rome, we're threatening Normandy, we're threatening Holland, we're threatening Denmark, and we can still get up to Norway.
Yeah, that is certainly a key spot on the map. There's no doubt about that. And controlling that naval base there is going to be really, really key. So that is the end of the Americans' turn. They've abandoned the Norway knockout. They've shifted instead to defending the victory cities in the Pacific. Takes us over to China's second turn. So the Chinese started the round with 8 IPCs. They unfortunately cannot purchase any artillery because the Burma Road is still closed. So the best that they can do is purchase 2 infantry and save 2 IPCs for next time. For combat moves, they are going to go after the guy in Hubei. They're going to send 2 infantry and the Flying Tiger out there to Hubei to pick off the one guy that is there. They were successful in taking the Hubei territory. They took out the Japanese infantry and took no losses this time. So 3-0 for the good guys. For their non-combat, they decided to leave Shenxi and bring the party down to Sichuan, which I think was interesting because we had just talked about it in the first video about how critical the Shenxi position was because it connected to so many places. Any thoughts about why the party left Shenxi and came down to Sichuan?
He's shown us that he's not going heavy into China and into Russia, which really frees us up to go much more offense. The stack in Shenxi is a defensive move in order to maintain an attack on any Chinese territory that's adjacent to it. We don't have to do that anymore. Now it's all about how much pressure can we put on the Japanese in order to take pressure off of Calcutta.
At the end of the Chinese turn, they end with 8 infantry in Sichuan, along with that Flying Tiger, 2 guys in Hubei. Then the Russians are still hanging out in Shenxi and in Kansu. So there's a couple of different options there. It'll be interesting to see how the Japanese respond over to Germany's second turn. And man, they've got a lot to do and a lot of material to work with here. But they've got a pretty substantial threat here on their eastern front. Let's see what they decide to do. They start by purchasing 6 infantry, 2 artillery, 2 transports, and an air base. For their combat, they are going to push back on that eastern front. They send a number of land units, and they commit almost all of their air units to taking the Baltic states, East Poland, and Bessarabia. Just really kind of creating that dead man zone, except for Bessarabia. They moved into Bessarabia with everybody that could reach there, so they got a pretty good stack going into that space. However, they did move down into Syria. They picked up an infantry and a tank from Greece from the transport in 97 and landed in Syria. The fighter from southern Italy decides to get in on the action, and they are trying to take out the one French guy, the poor French dude who's just chilling there by himself in Syria. Didn't seem to be bothering anybody, but he landed there trying to take that space. Let's see how it worked out for him. They were successful across the board in the Eastern Front. They took the Baltic states, East Poland, and Bessarabia with no problems. And they also had no problem in Syria. They took out the French dude, and it looks like they took no losses. Wow. Okay. So this is a little bit of turnabout being fair play, as it were. They had a really strong outcome here. They only lost 1 infantry in trade for 8 Allied infantry, 7 of them being Russians. So this was a very expensive round for the Russians here. I guess I'm wondering what the reaction was at the table.
This is the first time in this game, at least, you're going to start to see some decent Soviet casualties. Steven rolled 13 dice, and he only got 1 hit. Not the best outcome for us, but you have to consider that the Soviets have only taken 7 losses so far in this entire game. So this was a big stack of guys to lose. But they don't normally look this good in the first place.
So they had a little room to give. So that's at least the consolation prize here, right? All right, so let's look at their non-combat. Looks like they didn't move anybody new into Baltic states or into Eastern Poland, but they did move a tank into Bessarabia to join the group that is there. Some of the tanks moved down from Germany into Romania. Looks like a big chunk of the air power landed in Poland. That strategic bomber had to land there. This is probably a good time to remind everybody that in this setup, sometimes folks have a hard time telling the difference between the fighter, the tactical bomber, and the strategic bomber. So if you see a fighter on my map, almost certainly it's going to face to the left or to the right. Tactical bombers will face to the north so that they look like a T. And strategic bombers will face to the south because strategic starts with an S. I don't know. It had to point some direction. So I hope that helps as you're kind of looking at all this. Other German non-combat, they brought the destroyer over from 95 to join the Italian fleet off the coast of Greece. They almost entirely evacuated France. The land units that were in France, except for the AA gun, all moved into northern Italy. They moved out of southern France and into northern Italy. The tank that was in northern Italy moved to southern Italy. The fighter and attack bomber landed in Greece. But the guys in Tobruk, nobody in Tobruk moved out. The mech and the tank and the fighter all stayed in Tobruk. Put a pin in that and keep track of that, because there'll be something interesting that happens with that later. So note that those German guys are still in Tobruk. In the North Atlantic, the fleet abandons Sea Zone 112, moves back to the safe side of the Danish Straits. Now, where they are, they can't be attacked by the sea units. They can still be attacked by air units, but the sea units can't come through unless one of the Allied powers takes Normandy. To help with that, they used the transport that was in 112. They picked up a couple of guys from Germany and dropped them in Norway. The guys that were in Norway moved over to Finland. So now in Finland, we have a pretty healthy number of guys. It looks like there's 7 infantry there now. Time to mobilize those new units. They've got the 6 infantry, 2 artillery, 2 transports, and that fighter. Let's see where they go. They drop 2 infantry and an artillery into France, and then 4 infantry and an artillery into West Germany. The transports landed in Sea Zone 99 with the rest of the Axis fleet in the Med, and the airbase landed in Greece. Now they can scramble to defend Sea Zone 99 if they wanted to, and the air units in that space will be able to move 5 spaces instead of just their regular 4. I wonder what your thought was about the air base in Greece. Was this something that you were worried about, or does it give them range to something that is particularly important?
So from Greece, his aircraft at that air base can hit a few different territories in southern Russia and then land back in Greece or anywhere else along the Eastern Front. And you see his forces moving south from France into northern Italy, just in case I decide that what I need to do is to take Rome. I mean, I could take it if I absolutely wanted to. We'll see what the Italians do to defend it, but that way the Germans have a counterattack if I were to risk it all on taking his capital. That the Germans can just retake it on the next turn. That's why I see that German stack moving into northern Italy.
Well, let's see what the UK decides to do on their second turn. They, have, of course, still have split economies, right? So we're going to deal with the European side, and then the Pacific side will be separate. The Pacific side is looking a little thin right now, so there may not be a ton to do over here. For their purchases for the Atlantic side, they pick up 1 infantry, 3 mechs, a tactical bomber, and a fighter. But on the Pacific side, they purchase 3 infantry and an artillery. For their combat, they decide to make a landing on the beaches of Normandy and into Holland and Belgium. They use their 2 transports that were in 109. They bring over an infantry and an artillery for Normandy, and an infantry and a tank to land in Belgium. Both of those territories are unoccupied, so there's no need to bring any additional forces. They do opt to use their strategic bomber to do a bombing raid on the minor industrial complex in Paris. In the Mediterranean, the fighter and the tactical bomber that was in Persia and the fighter and tactical bomber in Egypt both came over to Syria, accompanied by the mech from Egypt, to try to pick off these German land units that have encroached into Syria. So we will see how that works out for them. There was no combat in the Pacific side, but let's look at the combat results for the Atlantic side. Of course, they landed in Normandy and Holland, Belgium with no problem. In France, there was some defense that happened there. The industrial complex got to shoot, and the fighter did try to intercept, but everybody missed on both sides, and they rolled for their damage and scored 6 points of damage on that industrial complex, which is the maximum that can be done to that complex, so it is completely inoperable and will need to be repaired if the Germans want to place any units in it. In Syria, though, they had a mixed bag. The UK was successful in taking out the infantry and the tank, but they did get a hit in return, and the UK opted to lose the mech rather than losing any of its air power, so they were not able to take the territory. So the German units have been destroyed, but they retain control of Syria for now. Total losses this time looks like 9 for the Axis and only 4 for the Allies, so pretty light on either side, but they did get those 6 points of damage to the industrial complex in Paris. And the UK picked up a ton of money. Looks like 5 IPCs in the Western Front of Europe. Non-combat, looks like they decided to fill the English Channel with Allied ships. They dropped in the 2 additional destroyers. They brought the carrier over with the American fighter and the UK fighter on it. The strategic bomber made it back into the United Kingdom. The TAC bomber that was in 109 landed in the UK. The air units that were in Syria moved back down and landed in Egypt, ending their turn there. On the Pacific side, this surprised me, and I want to get your take on this, Robin. The fighter that was in 39 lands in India. That makes sense to me. But the carrier moves out of 39 and moves all the way over to the Horn of Africa. I wonder if you can tell me what the thinking was in that choice.
So we were taking a look at the forces that Germany and Italy have in Greece, and considering the kind of damage that they could do into the Middle East. So we decided to use the ANZAC Navy to keep the Japanese transports at bay and to go ahead and bring that carrier back in order to help not only defend Egypt, but to keep him out of the Middle East at large.
We mobilized the new units. We dropped the infantry, the fighter, and the tactical bomber. All are going into the United Kingdom. And the 3 mechs are coming into the Union of South Africa, which I think is really an interesting choice. They will be able to get to Cairo in 2 turns if needed. The guy from Rhodesia also stepped up to Belgian Congo, by the way, continuing his long march north. But he will have some company here shortly with those mechs that will also be streaming to the north. On the Pacific side, of course, the 3 infantry, the artillery are coming into Calcutta. And once we stack it all up, that is what it looks like in the UK and the English Channel. That English Channel would be a hard nut to crack at this point. Calcutta has now got 9 infantry in it, 2 artillery, 2 AA guns, and a fighter in it. And that is the end of the UK's turn. Takes us over to Italy 2. Italy's second turn. This is their board state at the start. They've got a couple of options. They've got a transport, 2 transports that can get to some places, but they've really got to be paying attention to this American fleet that is out there just chilling off the coast of Gibraltar. It's no problem. But they've got 18 IPCs to spend, and they decided to spend it all on 6 infantry. They had no combat this time, so they didn't decide to attack anybody, but they moved right into non-combat. Oh boy, okay, they decided to basically batten down the hatches. Everybody from Yugoslavia came back to northern Italy. The tanks that were in Bulgaria and the Italian tank that was in Romania all came back to North Italy. The transports that were in 99 and in 97 both either came down to Tobruk to pick up guys and bring them back to southern Italy, or took the guys off of Cyprus and landed in southern Italy. So it is all hands back to the capital for the full defense of the homeland. The battleship and the cruiser decided to stay in 99 because there's German transports there that were going to need to be defended. But other than that, they have committed entirely to the defense of Italy. The guys that could not make it back to Italy because there wasn't enough space on the transports moved out of Tobruk and into Libya, I guess to either harass the Tunisians or get out of the way of potential attack from the UK units coming across North Africa. But it does kind of strand those German units there, doesn't it? Those are kind of an awkward, hey guys, where are you going? They've got a mech and a tank and a fighter there that are now in striking range of quite a few UK units. I remember thinking that guy in Alexandria drew the short straw when he got pushed out there, but now he's leading the charge at the retreating Axis units. They've got the 6th Infantry to mobilize. They can only put 3 in Rome because it's a minor complex there, so they dropped 3 there, and then 3 in northern Italy. So when you look at their total capability to defend, this is what they've got there. That takes us over to our friends in Australia and New Zealand, the ANZAC. This is their current board state. They still have their entire original navy, which is unusual in this game, which means that ANZAC's got a number of interesting options in this turn. For their purchase units, they've got the 10 IPCs to spend. They buy 2 guys for a walkabout. That's what all of those guys look like to me. The ANZAC infantry sculpts, like I promise you, whoever designed that was like, so they're out on walkabout, right? Let's make them walking. So all of the ANZAC infantry they're just guys walking around. I like it. And then, of course, their artillery units are there. They've got no combat this time. They decided to give Peach a chance. But they do have some really important non-combat moves. The transport from 63 grabs the Kiwi off of New Zealand and brings him over to South Australia. The guys in New South Wales split up. 2 of them head over to South Australia and 1 up to Queensland. The cruiser uses their super duper naval base to move 3 spaces from 54 through 55 through 42 and ending the turn in 37, which is going to block those transports. Now, obviously, there's lots of air power in the area, so that cruiser is probably not going to last very long, but that will stop those 4 transports in C-Zone 36 from cruising around and bringing that giant stack of guys into Calcutta. There's still a lot of guys that can get to Calcutta, but probably not enough to get through what's there, at least not on this turn. The destroyer that was in 49 moves up to 26, which is really important, because had they not done that, that fleet in 31 would have been able to land pretty heavy with the offshore bombardments and so forth into Honolulu. Let's see how they mobilize. Of course, they've only got the 1 complex, so that's the 2 infantry and the artillery landing in Sydney. When we look at their final board state, this is where all of their pieces are. The fighter stayed in Queensland. They've got 1 fighter there with the 4 infantry and the artillery, with both bases still pristine. The transport is hiding underneath Australia, and it seems to be in a safe spot at the moment, but it doesn't have access to a naval base. So its biggest reach at this point is only 2 spaces away, but Java happens to be 2 spaces away, which might be a reasonable target for them if they can pick off that island. So at the end of the Australia-New Zealand's turn, any thoughts about this one? This was a pretty straightforward move as far as I can tell.
Yeah, we just sent the cruiser to block the transports out of Calcutta. The destroyer, not only if he wants to kill it, he needs to send, again, enough planes to keep me from scrambling my fighters out from Hawaii. And if he is going to land in Hawaii, he's not going to get his 2 battleships and his cruiser shore shots.
They were not able to block the Japanese transports from landing in Australia if they decided to go that way. All 7 transports that we talked about a minute ago could all still land in the Northern Territory. I think 5 of them could land in Western Australia if they wanted to.
If he decided to go that way, it would be a significant threat on that victory city. But again, he needs 2 out of the 3 victory cities in order to win. And I'm pretty sure that those transports are going to be going to Calcutta in order to take that city. And it looks like he's going for Honolulu. Maybe
this is why he's purchased so many transports, because each one of these transports represents a threat, right? He started with 2, he only bought 6, and now he's bought 2 more. So he's got a lot of different threats that he can push out there. That takes us finally to the French. Their second turn, of course, they still do not have control of their capital, so they have no purchase units this time, but they do get a combat move if they want it. And they don't. So they are moving over to their non-combat. The guy steps over from Algeria into Tunisia. The cruiser moves up from 91 and joins the party, now a full Allied party, or a near full Allied party in 110, the English Channel. The fighter that was in the United Kingdom decides that it's going to head home and moves out and lands in Normandy to defend the 2 UK units that were able to liberate that territory for them. The destroyer decided to stay in 81 rather than traversing the canal and moving out into the Mediterranean. And that is the end of the French's turn and the end of round 2. Any thoughts about how round 2 went?
It's still anybody's game at this point. We were still pretty happy with the situation in Eastern Europe. I'm bummed that I'm not going to be able to show you guys the Norway knockout, but obviously the big threat for the Axis to win this game is going to be in the Pacific. So the entire game essentially comes down to what happens with the 6 out of 8 cities in the Pacific. They've telegraphed that they moved. So at this point, it's all about defending Honolulu, Sydney, and Calcutta. If we take a look in Europe, we're still pretty happy with where the Soviet Union is. they are consolidated, where the German forces are relatively split.
So that is the end of round 2, and that's where we're going to leave it for today. We will be back next time, and hopefully we will be we'll have another voice in our conversation. We'll have Charles, the aforementioned Charles, will hopefully be joining us for round 3, and we will look forward to seeing what happens in that one. We've got a couple of big question marks out there. What is going to happen around Honolulu? It looks like there's a lot of pressure that can be brought to bear there. Calcutta, it seems to have been cut off for now, but this game is tricky, so there may be the ability to attack Calcutta or Australia. There's just so many different options in the Pacific right now, but the Americans just dropped what I think is an impossibly large fleet off the coast of San Francisco. 2 carriers, a cruiser, a destroyer, 3 transports, and a fighter. That seems insane to me to be able to purchase in a single turn. As somebody who's played a lot of 42nd edition and Anniversary, like to see just the idea that the Americans can purchase 6 bombers at one time in round 2 without having taken the capital. It just seems insane to me. But that's part of global, right? Welcome to global, friends. This is kind of the nature of this version of the game, and I'm digging it. So I hope that you are too. And Robin, any final thoughts for the folks?
No, I'm excited to show you how this game plays out.
All right. Well, fantastic. We appreciate your time, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching part 2 of our coverage of the 2024 Axis and Allies Global Final. Thank you again to Robin Bielefeldt for taking the time to talk with me today about his match. And a special thank you to our friends at Historical Board Gaming for making this project possible. And a big thank you to the citizens of Board Game Nation for their continued support. If you'd like to support what we're doing here, get loads of exclusive content, and engage with our fantastic community, click the join button below and find the membership level that's right for you, and become an official citizen of Board Game Nation. When part 3 of this series is ready, you'll find it right here. To check out our other Championship Axis and Allies coverage, right this way. For our latest bit of mayhem, here you go. And if you're ready for more from Board Game Nation, click here to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.